Trump has returned to the United States after his state visit to Windsor. It went well, though they agreed to disagree on Ukraine. Trump refuses to give a security guarantee that would give the British considerable leverage over the Russians by creating a provocation if it came to conflict and getting Americans on board immediately. Trump is wise to that. So what is Trump returning to? Well, a lot of people think he's a neocon, that he's not going to drain the swamp. But in July, his Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, produced evidence, printed CIA documents that showed that on the 8th of December 2016, the CIA did not think the Russians had hacked the 2016 election. The next day, Obama changed his mind and got his intelligence chiefs to write an intelligence community assessment which set the stage for the Russiagate campaign of 2017 to 2020, which basically had the media up in arms about Trump's alleged contacts with the Russians, that he was even a Manchurian candidate type of asset. A Manchurian candidate is a person, often a politician, secretly brainwashed or manipulated by a foreign enemy to unwittingly betray their own country, such as by acting as an assassin or puppet. The term comes from Richard Condon's 1959 novel and its 1962 film adaptation, which depicts a communist conspiracy. Now, we now know that Hillary Clinton, through various cutouts through her law firm, who then hired a media company called Fusion GPS, which in turn hired a former MI-6 agent called Christopher Steele, who produced a dossier about his Manchurian candidate status, which circulated far and wide in the media, even though it was never verified. And he was even offered $100,000 or $1 million by the FBI if he could verify it. Never mind the lies out there, and it's circulated for years. A lot of people know that. What a lot of people don't know is that the British also played a role. The British also played a role in demonizing Trump. Hillary's motive was that she wanted to win the election and get some dirt to stick to Trump. The British deep state's motivation was that Trump was threatening to pull out of NATO, and the British had considerable leverage, not having an army, through NATO, and they wanted to prevent that from happening and Hillary to be elected. And if Trump was elected, then the pressure on him about being an agent of Russia would prevent him from any of the rapprochement towards Russia that he promised during the election campaign.
To hear non-committal words like this.
Either they pay up, including for past deficiencies, or they have to get out. And if it breaks up NATO, it breaks up NATO.
Obviously, NATO is going to be incredibly concerned about a Trump presidency, about what that might mean for its future. Essentially, Donald Trump's comments have been more pro-Russia, more pro-the Kremlin than they have pro-NATO. And European members of NATO specifically really do look towards that military alliance for their security.
You've done your threat assessment. What are the two big threats that we ought to be paying attention to in 2024?
You have to add a political threat, which I'm worried about, which is Trump's re-election, which I think for the UK's national security is problematic, because if Trump, as it were, acts hastily and damages the Atlantic Alliance, that is a big deal for the UK. We've put all our eggs, in defence terms, in the NATO basket.
In 2016, Trump's foreign policy experts were in London, and they were set upon by British intelligence assets who tried to create these sting operations. We don't need to go into the detail, but it's out there. Books have been written about it. And of course, Christopher Steele was a former MI6 agent, former head of the Russia desk. Even The Guardian admits that the initial impetus came from London, as you can see in this article. Now, this documentary is not about Trump, it's about another leading figure. In SW1 and Mayfair, there are a lot of private intelligence agencies. They carry out due diligence work. They work for hedge funds. Information is the currency of money making, and London is one of the world's financial capitals. So if a company is going to buy another company, they hire private investigators who do journalism, except they only have one client, as it were. The person who pays them, they find out, they dig around, they ask questions, they make interviews, they look on public and private databases to find out as much as they can for their clients. Christopher Steele worked for Orbis, which did that sort of thing, but obviously Christopher Steele was one level above that, since he was actually carrying out what seemed to be pure deceptions to get a very powerful person destroyed. It seems that the private intelligence agencies have names like Kroll and K2 and CX and Orbis obviously have several functions. One is the honest work they do, and some of them do dishonest work as well. Now, I say all this because documentary, the whistleblower I'm about to talk to, is going to testify about the much less well-known campaign of destruction against Rupert Murdoch and his newspapers. Company X, Orbis tried to take down President Trump, and Company X tried to take down the British press.
Yes, and they were successful, though.
Yeah. Just to be clear, Trump in 2016 was under attack from two vectors. One was Hillary Clinton with the approval of Obama, which highlighted the Steele dossier, which said that Trump was a Russian asset and was a Manchurian candidate who was doing the Russians' bidding. And they were relying on a guy who made things up, as we will see, based on what he wanted, what he thought Obama and Clinton wanted to hear, which was that there was a long developed relationship between Putin and Trump, and that with Trump in power, they got all their Christmases come true. That was Christopher Steele who authored that dossier. None of it's been proven, but it had huge impact on the first Trump term, with all media quoting it as gospel. The second vector of attack was a series of intrusions, or let's say attempts by British intelligence assets to get Trump's inexperienced foreign policy advisors to admit that they were taking orders and getting information and carrying water for the Russians. Again, I won't go too much into detail. Christopher Steele was working for Orbis, which was one of those intelligence agencies I just mentioned, may have had contacts higher up. The British agents who were inveigling the Trump advisors also worked for private intelligence agencies. Hacklet is a name that comes up sometimes. So these agencies had ulterior motives or second principles. They had somebody higher up who wanted to do this. Perhaps they're still MI6 affiliated, although they were nominally private intelligence agencies, both Hacklet and Orbis. So Orbis was the American vector and Hacklet was the British vector, and they were both, Hacklet and Orbis, are London-based private intelligence agencies. Now, private intelligence agencies also conspired to take out the British press a few years earlier than that, and in the process give Rupert Murdoch, one of the most powerful men in the world, a bloody nose. And it relates to the situation we're in now, because if they hadn't knocked out Rupert Murdoch and harmed him, perhaps the British press would have been less supine and we wouldn't be inches away from World War III as we are now.
people don't know the truth about it. I mean, that phone hacking is just a tiny little surface thing.
Are you a woman on a mission?
To expose.
If you ask people what the hacking scandal was, outside the Anglophone world, they don't know what you're talking about. Inside the Anglophone world, they might say something like, it was the day Murdoch got his comeuppance, when his minions were exposed for hacking people's voicemails and getting stories that way. Victims ranged from Elton John to Hugh Grant to non-celebrities to whom tragedies had happened, like the 13-year-old girl Millie Dowler. Certainly, Murdoch was no hero. He was a villain. But he wasn't the only villain. Arguably, you could say he fell into a trap. The wily old man was, in that sense, a victim. And this is that story. Because it pertains to the loss of free speech in England. When we think of hacking victims, of course, we think of Hugh Grant, Sienna Miller, and the royal family, and of course that's true. But in a bizarre way, they were not the only victims, because Rupert Murdoch and the free press were victims. All will be explained. And who were the perpetrators? Well, just as Hacklit and Orbis and those who worked for them almost destroyed Trump, an organisation called CX and a man called John Boyle actually did take down Rupert Murdoch. But first we'll look at the official story, the story you'll read about or hear about if you watch or read the mainstream media. It's informative up to a point, and this gives useful background. Like this documentary by Australia's 60 Minutes programme from a few years ago.
But it's not high-profile celebrities who've sparked a major parliamentary investigation.
That's all I can say.
Arrests and resignations at the very top of the news international empire.
I'm not making any comments.
What really got Britons baying for Rupert Murdoch's blood was his newspaper's appalling treatment of ordinary people facing real-life tragedy.
It was in fact ordinary people who were being affected, and there was certain cruelty.
Mark Lewis is the lawyer for the family of 13-year-old Millie Dowler, who was murdered in 2002.
This is a campaign for proper standards in the press, not intrusion into people's life.
When Millie went missing, a private investigator working for the News of the World hacked into her phone. And he not only listened to her voicemail, but he deleted messages, clearing space for more calls. Millie's family, seeing this phone activity, were given false hope that their little girl was still alive.
The voicemails were all full, and there was an automated message saying, "Sorry, please try again later." And then the next day, the next time they called, they could leave a message, and that made them think that Millie was alive.
Because the News of the World reporter had actually deleted the messages.
But 60 Minutes wasn't the mainstream channel that actually broke the story and was associated with the scoop of exposing the scandal. That role falls to Nick Davies. Nick Davies was The Guardian's top investigative journalist, and The Guardian is the paper with the best reputation for exposing the scandals of powerful people. Murdoch had long been in their sights. Early on, he met somebody called Christine Hart, who'd worked as both a private investigator for these private companies that we've talked about and as a journalist, top-flight journalist for the Sunday Times, the Mirror and other papers, and News of the World too. Nick Davies had been investigating the story for a while, and some of his findings had focused on the importance, the Christopher Steele, as it were, of the hacking scandal, of a man called John Boyle, who worked for CX, a private investigator based in central London, and who may have had contacts further afield. John Boyle is a central character, an important person with many links to the top of the intelligence agencies, but he's also a mystery. There are no photographs of him on the internet, and precious little material though he does exist, Nick Davies even mentions him, and there's a handful of passing descriptions in the mainstream media, but nothing that indicates his true importance.
How the British phone hacking came to be, I was the one who started it. I've been left out of the story. The main narrator has been The Guardian and a man called Nick Davies. Nick Davies came to me, I think it was 2011. He wanted desperately to know about a man called John Boyle. I said, gee, I don't know who that is, even though I was his mistress for many years. So Nick Davies told me he was followed. He said, and I was like, whoa, are they going to follow me now? And who is? Then Davies asked to meet me again. We met again, and he said, I know about the houses in London. He was saying that Boyle owned these really big, beautiful houses in Mayfair and Kensington, and I had actually lived in one for a while, so I knew they existed. So I said, I didn't know anything about that. And he said, well, what about these parties? And he talked about parties where MPs, top politicians went, and there were call girls, high-class escort girls, cocaine, blackmail operations, a bit like Jeffrey Epstein going on.
Operation Weeting was the Metropolitan Police's investigation into the phone hacking scandal. They eventually identified more than 5,000 victims. And they also talked to a number of journalists, and we'll come to that. But who was the kingpin in this terrible crime? Well, they were stopped by his barrister at the gate. And perhaps there were other pressures put on them. So this high-profile, high-prestige government police investigation didn't get to the bottom of the story. They didn't get to talk to the most important perpetrator, the intelligence-linked John Boyle. But The Guardian is not like the government. It's independent. It tells the truth. Nick Davies was their top investigative journalist. He is the British Isles' most famous digging investigator, dogged, truth-telling, brave. What happened when his book came out? Was John Boyle all over it? Did he reveal everything as he'd promised?
And it was quite interesting because when Nick Davies' book came out, John wasn't mentioned at all. His name was thrown in once or twice, but he could have been the bin man. Now, I'm sorry, he is a really strong character, the one that brought in phone hacking.
Tell us how he did that.
Yeah, so what happened, the story was, I was working as a private investigator, come journalist, living in London, working for the News of the World and various other places. It was 1998, I believe, just around the Omar bomb. And a company rang me and they said, we're a computer company, we're based along Buckingham Gate, and we want you to do a surveillance for us.
It all started when she was called to a job by a computer company when they'd been given their briefing to track a South African person and find out where he lived. Her collaborator, Martin, thought they were something else than a simple computer company. She did the tracing job as best she could, but the target was well aware and slipped away. He knew he was being followed. But she was given a second chance, and this time she got the number and address.
And it was weird, I didn't hear from them for a couple of weeks. Then they said, would you come to a meeting today? And I'm like, yeah, sure, you know, you can tell money to classy people. So went into their offices, didn't bring Martin, sat down in this long boardroom, and suddenly all these men came in. There were about 6 of them, and there was Andrew there. He introduced them. He said, this is such and such anti-chief of anti-terrorist squad. This is ex-New Scotland Yard chief of, and they were all chief of polices. And they sat down opposite me. They were giving me the filthiest looks, especially one who had dark brown hair, little round eyes, quite attractive. And Andrew said, do you know who we are? And of course I remember what Martin said. I said, you're MI-6, thinking, what's going on here? And they went, oh, clever girl, because I hadn't been clever, because I just thought they were a computer company. And they said, how much access, the one sitting opposite me with brown hair, said, how much access to the News of the World have to the boys at Hereford. And I was quite shocked because I thought, well, how do you know I work for the News of the World? And I was trying my brain to think quickly. Well, they're MI6, obviously. They hired me for a reason. So they hired me for a reason. They brought me in there. They asked me questions about what the News of the World were doing. The News of the World were using serving SAS. Now, they used them on surveillance to follow Diana, Tony Blair, whoever they wanted, really. Next thing, it was only like maybe a few months later, John Boyle contacted me, took me out to dinner, and he said, I want an introduction to the News of the World. And I thought, well, I'm not going to give you that introduction because it might take my work away.
John Boyle was working for CX, a private intelligence company in Buckingham Gate, but he was widely believed to have MI6 connections. Just like Christopher Steele worked for Orbis, but had been a desk officer for the Russia desk for MI6. Do you really ever leave UK's premier intelligence organisation? Just as Christopher Steele wanted to trip up a man who was about to compromise Britain's national security interests, John Boyle was on a mission to hobble the British press because his superiors were angry that the News of the World was getting too big for its boots, hiring SAS, Britain's top secret special forces, to carry out surveillance of famous people. The News of the World was not then yet hacking people's mobile phones. That was to come. That was the trap they were being set up for. Christine initially said no to her boss's requests, but she changed her mind. They were so persistent, so hungry for new methods to break stories and find out what was going on in celebrity lives, so that she decided to bring John Boyle and the top executives of News of the World together. It was to prove fatal to the newspaper executives' lives and future careers.
Now, I knew never to do anything illegal for the press because they could blackmail you. They tape everything, they'd have a record of it, and they could easily blackmail you. They could blackmail you for sex, they could blackmail you to do really dirty stuff that you don't want to do, and they've done it to other PIs. So it's really clued up about that, and I've been lied about ever since that I wasn't. Sorry, nothing wrong with my IQ level. And so I didn't want to do this, and I said, look, there's a man called John Boyle. I know that he uses people to do that kind of thing. Why don't I put you in touch? And the next day, I was dating Greg Miskiw at this point, and Phil Hall was his boss, so it was all very incestuous. And so I introduced one lover to another, Greg and John. We went out to dinner, and it was that night, Greg later told me, that the phone hacking was birthed. John Boyle said to Greg, I've got this amazing trick. I can get the codes for people's answer machines. You can listen to anybody. And that's when it was birthed. Of course, John was charging something like £2,000 per person getting their codes. And he later told me that it was a scam, that most people around that time only had 1, 2, 3, 4. Nobody knew what a code was on their mobiles. Nobody knew to change it. So literally, the News of the World were paying him, you know, a couple of £1,000s for nothing. And he was changing people's codes and coming back and saying it's 4343. And when actually it was 1, 2, 3, 4, and they changed it themselves. Because there are not many people used to ring their mobiles from another number to find their messages. I mean, people just use their mobiles. So this went on for a long time. The News of the World weren't happy. And of course it was Phil, my ex-lover from the south of France, who had said, it's okay, bring this into Fleet Street. When Andy Coulson came in, who's actually gone to prison for it, Andy didn't want it. Andy thought, no, this is bad, get rid of it. But so it's weird that he went to prison, but again, people that are connected, you get a pass. People that are working class, they don't get the pass. And what happened, the Phil Hall and Greg Miskew decided that, oh, we're paying this John Boyle too much. He's very cocky, and he's got a little office boy, a little footballer, a little Cockney office boy that does the donkey work. Why don't we nick the little office guy, pay him 100 grand a year, which is nothing compared to what they were paying for it before, and we can do it en masse. We can hack everybody. And this little Cockney guy, he won't know about security, so he'll do it to the royal family too. This is a good idea. I mean, it's really stupid thinking, but they all want to be James Bond, yet they don't know about the security of spying.
Well, to the general public, Boyle's little office boy, Glenn Mulcaire, was the central figure in the News International hacking scandal. He was a former professional footballer turned private investigator and was hired by the News of the World to gather information more cheaply than Boyle would provide, apparently. Police analysis of Mulcaire's handwritten notebook seized in 2006 and computer files documented attempts to hack will successfully intercept the voicemails of over 2,000 people. By 2012, Operation Wheating, which was the Met Police's investigation into phone hacking, had identified more than 5,000 potential victims linked to Mulcaire's activities, including actors Jude Law, Sienna Miller and Hugh Grant, musicians George Michael and royals, and politicians like Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, Prince William and Prince Harry. There are also, apart from the aforementioned Millie Dowler, members of the general public, including the relatives of soldiers killed in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Phone hacking is a ridiculous spy trick. Why? Because when you ring someone's mobile, the messages go into the "you've read it now" box. That makes the person they're spying on alerted. The only way you can spy is to be a ghost. So clearly they were cruising for a bruising, as they say. So, and not only that, all the journalists that work there, often they were female, they dated police officers. If they got to hear about it, they'd tell their boyfriends, and the boyfriends would arrest anyone doing it. It was very stupid. And anyway, so they were cracking on, acting like they were a private detective agency, using this guy Glenn Mulcaire. When I got home from having dinner with Greg, I just was blown away. I thought, they're doing something highly illegal, and they're a British newspaper. How can they do that? And I thought, I have to talk to another PI about this. So I rang John Boyle, I haven't spoken to him in a while, and I said, John, the News of the World are pinging mobiles, including boasted about David Beckham's mobile, to find out where David Beckham was. They were literally had him under surveillance, illegally, and they were doing this phone hacking thing. And John went, oh, lied to me to the start by not admitting, that he had started that. And he said to me, well, who are they using to do that? And I said, it was someone called Glyn. And he went, you're kidding me. Because it was his office boy that they'd stolen. We don't need you anymore, but take the office boy. And apparently, Andy Coulson said to him, we don't care, we owe you $250,000, piss off. And he had to blackmail Andy. He said, I've spied on a lot of important people here. I'm going to tell them you don't pay me. So he got the $250,000 back at the end. And that's the whole story, a whole load of different victims that nobody's ever mentioned, because Nick Davies doesn't care to mention this side of things, because as soon as I told John Boyle, he said, they've had it, I'm going to destroy them. Now, this is a man with top cop connections, top MI-6 connections, the ex-MI-6 agency is known as MI-6's commercial arm, who I believe wanted to destroy the paper anyway. And he said, I'm going to tear them down, I'm going to destroy them. Now, it was him that made the phone calls. Next thing was a listening van outside Mulcaire's address. Obviously, Boyle knew where it was, he'd been round there. And next thing, he was arrested. Now, Nick Davies' version of events, suddenly he was sitting at the Guardian, he sniffed the air. Oh, I think the News of the World are phone hacking. Let me investigate this. And like Batman, he threw into and invested this naughty PI. Well, sorry, it's total lies, because PIs in London, they don't do that kind of thing. This man wasn't a PI, he was a footballer. They had stolen the asset from a PI. So you have to tell that story. But if Nick tells that story, then he's not Batman in the story. Boyle decided to destroy them. And he did destroy them.
How did he destroy them?
Oh, sorry. He just said, this is what this guy's doing.
The building behind me is not just the London office of the world's most famous secret agent. It's also the real-life headquarters of SIS, Britain's secret intelligence service, better known to the rest of the world by its nickname, MI-6. The building
Was
is
John
a
Boyle
secure,
just
cutting-edge fortress
avenging the
its
fact
predecessors have often
that
been
the News of the World had hired his office boy, Glenn Mulcair, and used his services much more cheaply than those provided by John Boyle himself? But John Boyle had been cheating them, so he couldn't really complain. Anyway, that's probably not the real story, because behind John Boyle was MI6, and MI6 had done tricks before. That was their modus operandi. That's what they did. They trapped and they deceived. And they used John Boyle to trap and eventually get imprisoned the journalists working for Rupert Murdoch's newspaper, News of the World.
Mr. Mulcair was the man arrested this morning. He's been arrested in this, new investigation on suspicion of hacking phones.
Then John Boyle contacted me. He brought in this phone hacking trick. He allowed them to talk to the little Cockney helper, and they stole the little Cockney helper. And I believe that it was an operation. They do all these little operations where they act out scenarios. I believe that John brought it in, introduced the editors to the little, like cheese. They put him down like cheese. Look, you could get it so cheap if you ask this little naive little person who's doing it. They let the editors talk to this little naive person. And of course, they stole him. They stole him. Suddenly, you got this person doing highly illegal stuff. He's keeping records. PIs don't keep records. He's keeping records of it, and he's hacking royal family. No PI would ever do this, not in a million years. Now ITV have made Nick's story into The Hack, starring David Tennant and Toby, can't remember his second name, but really good actors and actresses. And of course it's not true.
Company X, Orbis tried to take down President Trump, and Company X tried to take down the British press.
Yes, and they were successful, though.
In the shadowy world of 2016 election intrigue in the US, Orbis Business Intelligence, a London-based firm co-founded by ex-MI6 officer Christopher Steele, played a pivotal role in the deep state's war against Trump. Steele compiled a controversial dossier alleging Trump's ties to Russia, including compromat and campaign collusion. The dossier fueled a 2-year-long FBI investigation. However, the claims were unverified, the sources were unreliable. Recently, Trump's Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, declassified documents in July of this year that accused Obama officials of a treasonous conspiracy by relying on the discredited dossier to manufacture Russian interference claims.
Do you see crimes here?
I do, Sean, and I'm referring all of these documents that we have found and uncovered, referring them to the Department of Justice. I just want to mention quickly, Sean, you mentioned the Steele dossier. That plays a critical role in these documents that we released.
It mainly affects the US, but we'll see if the fallout leads to arrests in the UK intelligence community. One can but hope, but they do tend to get away with murder. Agencies hobble free speech in Britain.
Well, MI6 found out that the News of the World were out. They were getting out of their pram. They could have had a quiet word with Murdoch, like, what are you doing? Stop.
Right.
They decided, let's scare the shit out of journalists everywhere. Right. So they sent in the Trojan horse of that Mulcair, who was a pawn. When they do operations like this, they don't know if it will work or not. So it could have been Miscue and Phil Hall would have said, no, we don't want the little office boy, we'll just deal with John. And then they would have thought of something else. But they went for the cheese. Great, it's working. And next thing, the cheese gets arrested, they all get arrested, they go to prison. And when you ring up and you say, well, what's going on? And I went for an interview with Kroll too, with a guy called Jason, and he'd worked for the Mail, and then he went to work for Kroll. And he said to me, they even got rid of people that researched birth certificates and went up to St Catherine's House for birth certificates. They were that terrified of investigations. And what they do these days, newspapers stamp on some investigations, but really, and I've heard this from editors, Fleet Street now is all about PR. The PR agencies run Fleet Street. They put things out, they call it investigations, but it's not.
What was the consequences of this? Well, News of the World closed in 2011. The English-speaking world's most sold newspaper, 2.7 million copies. It was a staple on most Sunday breakfast tables, at least among the working classes. 200 people were fired, and it sabotaged Rupert Murdoch's reputation. His bid to take over BSB failed. He was hauled before the Leveson Commission of Inquiry to explain for himself. His son had to step down as director of News Corporation, and his protégés, including CEO Rebekah Brooks, the one in the lady in the red with the red hair, had to step down, and Andy Coulson, who later became David Cameron's press director, actually faced jail time, as did a number of News of the World journalists. It's meant that, it sent a clear message to newspapers that illegal news gathering tactics could face serious consequences. It also fostered a culture of caution in the newsroom as newspapers implemented stricter editorial oversight, with compliance officers and legal teams scrutinising stories before publication. This shift aimed to prevent further scandals, but also slowed down the reporting process, particularly for investigative pieces requiring sensitive sources. Now, this has real consequences. I've often wondered, before I dug into this story, why the British press seem to have been so cautious and uninteresting in the last 10 years, and so towing of the official line on things that the alternative media, often based in the US, call out as hoaxes. So in a way, you could say that although it's about hacking, and although there were 7,000 victims who had up to 1 billion in payments paid out to them, I mean, I was working for a station called TNT, an Australian station that had many, many hosts, and we were running a 24-hour operation. You could run 30 stations like that. We were 70 staff or something for 30 years with the money that Murdoch had to pay out to the hacking victims. So it was a lot of money there that could have been spent on real journalism rather than fines and punishment payments. The fact that Hugh Grant got to smile, and Sienna Miller and so on, they got to fill their already full bank accounts with even more money. Well, that matters less maybe than MI-6, by using an asset inside the private investigations industry, were able to steer and control the media so that the war party in Britain could more easily carry out its planning without anyone stopping or questioning them. That's my take on it.